Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to Living in the West. In these episodes of Living in the West, we're looking into the lives of the Muslims who are living in the West, and some of the Muslims who live in the West and the minorities in the West, how they are supposed to live, what interaction they're supposed to have. Is it permissible for them to live there? The classifications of them living there, a very important topic. And with me I have Sheikh Al-Haddad from the Muslim Research and Development Foundation from the UK, a think tank, an organisation helping those Muslims in the West to find solutions to their problems. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Sheikh, in previous episodes we've spoken about the Muslims and how we classify certain lands that belong to the Muslims or don't belong to the Muslims, and you give some explanation. Can you give us a concise summary of what these classifications were, Sheikh?
Okay. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. In summary, we said that we have to look at the consequences of the classification before dwelling into the classification itself. And we said that all the fuqaha, almost all of them, have classified the land or the globe into two main classifications, Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Kufr. And Dar al-Islam mainly is the land that is controlled by the law of al-Islam, where al-Islam is giving the superiority over any other law. Dar al-Kufr is the land that does not give this superiority to al-Islam. This is the two main classifications.
And in this Dar al-Kufr, for example, there are more clarifications need to be made actually. We spoke about Dar al-Harb. Okay. What do we mean by Dar al-Harb? Because this is one of the classifications.
Yeah, this notion, Dar al-Harb, has been heavily used by many people now, including maybe some of the groups, certain groups, and certain young people, this issue of Dar al-Harb. So maybe it is important to clarify it a little bit.
It's quite a hot topic, basically.
Yes, it's a very hot topic, yes. Dar al-Harb, the fuqaha, the jurists and the scholars, they classified Dar al-Kufr into mainly two types. The first type is Dar al-Harb, and the second type is Dar al-Ahd. Dar al-Kufr means the land that has waged war against Muslim or in a state of war with Muslims. Okay? Or to be more precise, with the Islamic State. This is Dar al-Harb. Dar al-Ahd is the land that has been in a state of war with Muslims, but it is now have a covenant or an agreement, a treaty with Muslims. So the Harb is not at the moment on. There is a pause. And during that pause, because of this treaty, this land is classified as Daru al-Ahd, the covenant abode, or the abode of covenant. Now, maybe you have heard that the Hanafi jurists, they don't have this classification, Dar al-Harb and they don't have the classification of Dar al-Kufr into Dar al-Harb and Dar al-Ahd. They consider Dar al-Kufr is equivalent to Dar al-Harb. And this is quite important, because you remember when we said that some Hanafi jurists considered the land where Muslims feel secure as the land of al-Islam, and some thinkers quote this from the Hanafis, and they said that European countries are considered to be or can be considered as Dar al-Islam. We need to tell them that you have to consider the other classification of the Hanafis, and you have to look at it, because the Hanafis, they don't differentiate between Dar al-Harb and Dar al-Kufr. So they don't say that Dar al-Kufr is classified into Dar al-Harb and Dar al-Ahd. They consider Dar al-Kufr is equivalent to Dar al-Harb. What about Dar al-Ahd? Do the Hanafi scholars neglect the fact that there might be a treaty between the Muslims and the Dar al-Kufr, whereby there is no war between them. They don't neglect this. But they say, even if there is a treaty between the Muslims and the non-Muslims, still the land governed by the non-Muslims and governed by the non-Islamic laws is considered to be Darul Harb, although it is in a state of agreement or a treaty with Muslims.
Can you give some explanation in terms of examples? I mean, for example, the time of the Quraysh and Hudaybiyah, I mean, would this be a classification that could be used?
Yeah. The Hanafis, they still call that Dar, although it has a treaty like the Quraysh, they consider it as Darul Harb. And this is what many people who quote the Hanafis, they try to ignore or overcome this reality. And that's why we tell them, no, if you are quoting Hanafis, you have to be precise in quoting Hanafis, and you have to mention this. And you cannot just eliminate this.
It's like picking and choosing, not taking the whole ruling.
Exactly. And if we are talking, if this discourse is an academic discourse, then we have to bring everything into perspective, because the Hanafis, all of the Hanafi scholars have mentioned this. And the Hanafi school of thought is one of the well-established school of thought. Many Muslims, actually some people say most of the Muslims are following the Hanafi school of thought.
Yes.
And we are benefiting from the legacy of the Hanafi scholars. All of us, the whole Muslim world is benefiting from the legacy of Abu Hanifa, etc. So we have to quote the Hanafi school of thought accurately. And we have to mention this thing. Now, whether we accept it, we don't accept it, this is something else. But we have to quote it correctly. Now, the Hanafis, as we said, they don't classify Darul Kufr into Darul Harb and Darul Ahd. As we said, they classify Darul Kufr, or they equate between Darul Kufr and Dar al-Harb. This is very important, because once we discuss the issue of the permissibility of riba in non-Muslim land, all those who claim that it is allowed to deal with riba, okay, or to deal in riba in non-Muslim land, they quote who? They quote the Hanafi scholars. And this is very, very problematic. Because if you are quoting the Hanafis, it means that you are implicitly accepting their notion that this land is Dar al-Harb.
No, you know, you've said this now, and it's very interesting, because I think we need an explanation to say, well, what are the consequences of accepting that this land is Dar Harb? What are the consequences?
Exactly.
What do we need to make clear that's obligatory upon the Muslim when he accepts this consequence? Okay.
Now, this point that you have mentioned is a very crucial point. Now, once we say that it is Dar al-Harb, many people and many groups, they fall into this trap. And it is good. We don't want to hide things. We want to explain things. Once they consider this land as Dar al-Harb, then all consequences of Dar al-Harb, okay, are considered according to them inevitable. Means, okay, Dar al-Harb, we are allowed to maybe kill, we are allowed to rob the people's money, we are allowed to steal, we are allowed to even not to implement other parts of Al-Islam, even if we are living there. And that is totally wrong. And because of this connection that some people have established, the other thinkers who don't want this to happen, they came to this notion or to this classification, and they said, we don't need to be bound by this classification, let us just discard it and look for another classification. And this approach is wrong, because this approach has been established in our books of Al-Fiqh. We cannot discard it, but we have to understand it correctly. And this is where many of the contemporary thinkers went wrong. They discarded this classification in order to bring their own classification, which will not be accepted because it is not supported nor by the Quran or the Sunnah, nor it is supported by what the fuqaha,
there's no lineage to this.
Yes. Stated. But if they say, okay, if you classify the Dar al-Kufr, or if you classify the abode, the globe, into two abodes, Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harb, means Dar al-Harb you are allowed to kill, you are allowed to steal, and you are not allowed to leave some ahkam of Sharia in that. We say no. Who said that? Once we say that this is Dar al-Harb, then the consequence or these consequences are inevitable. No. This has to be clarified. It might be Dar al-Harb, but still, okay, we do not implement all the rulings that the fuqaha mentioned about Dar al-Harb, such as, okay, that the Harbis, okay, the Harbis have no sanctity of for their wealth and their life, okay. Why? Because they are considering them Harbis.
People that they're fighting against, basically.
Yes, okay. People are fighting against Islam. But we say, in Dar al-Harb, from a classical point of view, when the Muslim country sends some messengers to Dar al-Harb to negotiate something, although it is classified as Dar al-Harb, those messengers, when they go to that land, they are not allowed to steal, they are not allowed to kill, and they have to finish their mission and come back, and they are not allowed to portray those, they are not allowed to betray those people living in Dar al-Harb or the Harbis, although it is classified as Dar al-Harb.
Okay, we're going to look into these classifications a bit deeply just after this short break. Please do stay with us on Living in the West.
Back to the Prophet. Join Sheikh Amar in the program Back to the Prophet, wherein he teaches us practical lessons from the Prophet's life and how this can help us to overcome our challenges in the present.
We talk about the life example of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, seeking guidance for ourselves. In the early days after the revelation of the Holy Quran, the Muslims were greatly persecuted, so much so that quite a few Muslims had to leave Arabia and migrate to Africa to live among Ahl Kitab, Christian people who followed the gospel of Christ.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Living in the West. We're speaking about the classifications of Dar Harb, Sheikh. Could you just carry on with this classification and just bring it to a brief, concise summary?
Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. What we were saying is that Dar al-Harb or Dar al-Kufr is classified mainly into two classifications.
And this is the land of war, we're saying.
The land of war.
Okay.
Okay. No, Dar al-Kufr is classified into two main classifications, land of war and land of covenant.
Okay.
And we said that the very big mistake that many people fell into is considering Dar al-Harb as the abode where Muslims having war with, and they build all the consequences.
So basically they make it out as the extreme case scenario, or should we say what they're totally allowed to do. For example, if they're at war, they're allowed to take from the people, they're allowed to
just to steal, maybe kill. Even take.
This is in a war scenario.
Possess.
Yes.
Okay.
But you're saying now that this is not totally true in some cases of Dar Harb.
Exactly, because there are the messengers, etc., etc. Okay, but apart from that, they say Dar al-Ahd is the land that has a treaty with Muslims.
So now can I give an example? Are you saying like after the Hudaybiyah, for example?
After the Hudaybiyah,
there was a treaty between the Muslims and the Quraysh.
Exactly, the Hudaybiyah was a treaty between Muslims and Darul Kufr at that time. And after that, okay, there were peace, a temporary peace at that time. So Mecca at that time is best to be classified as Darul Ahd, and Muslims were allowed to go to perform Umrah, etc. So now, because of the New World Order, most Muslim countries have treaties with most of the Darul Kufr, or most of the non-Muslim countries.
The classifications of those countries.
So there is kind of a treaty. Now, we don't want to get into the discussion whether this treaty is legitimate or it is not legitimate. But even if we say that this treaty is illegitimate, who is allowed to break it? And this is one of the big mistakes of some of these groups, because they put themselves in charge for the Ummah to break these treaties. And even if you say that these treaties are illegitimate treaties, it is not for individuals to break these treaties.
So I can't tomorrow do a certain act or say a certain statement speaking on the behalf of the Ummah without the permission, basically.
Exactly.
And saying
even if you don't. That's why, see, from our Islamic heritage, if the ruler if the Muslim ruler is not implementing the penal code, the scholars, most of them, they say that it is not allowed for the individuals to implement those penal codes just directly. Why? Because to implement a penal code, for example, chopping the hand of the thief, there has to be some conditions. Is that true or not?
Yes.
Who is going to verify whether these conditions have been fulfilled before applying the had? It is what? It is the system.
So there's going to be anarchy. Everybody's going to apply it as a civil.
And everyone, based on his ijtihad, this is the big mistake that many people fell into, and we have to be careful. And we are talking openly here. We are not hiding anything. Many people fell into this mistake. My ijtihad that this is a thief, I have to cut his hand. Later on, his ijtihad will consider someone else as a thief, and he has to cut his hand. A group of people, they might have their ijtihad that, well, X country of the non-Muslim countries have broken their treaty with the Muslims, and therefore it is Darul Harb, and we have to wage war against them. But who gave you this authority? Don't link between the illegitimate contract that has been established between some Muslim countries and some non-Muslim countries as a basis for you to take over the opinion of all Muslims as if you are the Khalifa of them. This, as you said, it will be anarchy, because every group of people will use their ijtihad as a basis for their own actions, and we have to be careful of that. And so, in a nutshell, we say that many non-Muslim countries have kind of agreements with many many Muslim countries. So there is an element of ahd, there is an element of covenant between those non-Muslim countries and those Muslim countries. This is one thing. It is true that some non-Muslim countries are waging war against some Muslim countries. Then, of course, the inhabitants of those Muslim countries are looking at this country as Darul Harb because it is waging war against them. Similarly, this non-Muslim country and the inhabitants of that non-Muslim country will look at those Muslims as Harbi people. And by the way, this Darul Harb, the land of war, is a terminology that has been recently used by some non-Muslim thinkers, talking about the lands that are in a state of war, or that in a state of wars against their countries. So, in a nutshell, this covenant, this agreement have to be taken into consideration. So, we may say that many of those non-Muslim countries are considered to be Dar al-Ahd because of the agreement that have been established between them and many of the Muslim countries. But here I would like to highlight one other important issue. okay, which might be the conclusion for this discussion. We are talking about living in the West. We are talking about Muslims living in the West. Those Muslims who are living in the West, they have a different perspective, from the other Muslims living in Muslim countries. Why? Because there is a special agreement between them and their countries when they entered those countries, okay? When they entered those countries by legitimate reasons, okay? Through legitimate reasons such as getting a visa from those countries.
And if we're going to finish this subject, these legitimate agreements you're talking about, are these tacit approvals? Because
these are tacit approvals, okay, and therefore those Muslims living in those countries have special agreement with the governments of those countries. Now, if we want to get into a deeper discussion, you might say, or someone might say, yes, we agree that there is an agreement between the governments or many governments of European countries and the Muslims living in those governments, but there are some European governments or some Dar al-Kufr governments or some non-Muslim governments that have broken their agreements with Muslims many times, so they don't have any kind of covenant. Mm-hmm. They don't have any kind of sanctity, okay, you can say. Mm-hmm. And in this case, what are we going to say? Are we going to say that the treaty has been broken between them, or what? We say, even if the agreement has been broken between the individuals, mm-hmm. the Muslims, and the government, but there is a social agreement, social contract between the Muslims living in any of those European or non-Muslim countries. This social contract, maybe Thomas Hobbes, the famous thinker in the 17th century, he introduced this social contract concept, and many other people have mentioned it. But from the Islamic perspective, this social contract has been established way before Thomas Hobbes and other thinkers. What is this social contract? Al-ma'rufu urfan kal-mashruti sharta. What is known by custom is considered to be, or takes the power of what has been clearly agreed, okay, in a contract. It is not a written contract, but it is what? A known contract. It is like the social contract. So Muslims living in non-Muslim countries, whether you classify these Muslim countries Dar al-Kufr, Dar al-Ahad, Dar al-Harb, they have a social contract between them and the people living in these countries. Therefore, they should look at themselves from this angle, and they are not allowed to steal the people. They are not allowed to do all things that the people have looked at them as trusted people.
Okay, but somebody may see this scenario, Sheikh, and say, this is all and well, but the Ummah is one body, for example. There's affliction going on everywhere. How do we hold fast to these rules of, say, this ahd, even when we see this infliction? This is one of the major questions. We're seeing an infliction by people who we see clearly breaking treaties. How do we as a group of people now accept this? And it's quite a strong argument. Yeah.
I don't know whether we have time to discuss this argument, okay, because this is a quite long argument, and it is an important one, okay. But I want to clarify more the point. I said that individuals living in non-Muslim countries have social contracts, have urfi contract between themselves and the other non-Muslim colleagues, or the non-Muslims citizens living in those countries.
And they've accepted that because this is tacit, so they've accepted this by just being part of the system.
Exactly.
They've accepted it.
See, who accepted it? We have to be careful,
Yes.
because some people might argue it is not the Muslims who accepted it, because some Muslims might, and some of the young people, they might say, well, we haven't accepted
Yes.
it. No, it is not you, but the other non-Muslims are the one who accepted it, because they are looking at you as what? They are not looking at you as a harbi, as someone who is waging war against them. They are looking at you as a trustworthy person living among them. You are one of the citizens. You see, we have to be careful. We are not talking about the hostility, their hostility, and some extreme parties looking at Muslims that they are foreigners, they have to be expelled, etc. Yes, they are looking at them from this angle. Some of those parties are looking at Muslims from this angle, but they are not looking at those Muslims as if the Muslims are waging war against them and they are not trustworthy people. Okay? So, therefore, this contract has to be monitored and witnessed whenever a Muslim is dealing with the other citizens, living with him in that country. We don't want to get into the discussion which is the relationship between the Muslim and the government. This is maybe another discussion, and we will... I prefer not to discuss it because of time constraints.
No, you've clarified this very well. Jazakallah khair. Sheikh Haytham Al-Haddad from Muslim Research and Development Foundation. I see from what you're saying, Sheikh, it's very clear now, but to many of you, you may say that there's more questions to be answered. Well, we've got many more episodes of Living in the West. Please stay with us. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.